As I think about Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin related folks, the very clear thing is that they're a group of people that have just shown to be very certain in uncertainty. That's been true for over a decade. You've got a group of people that had high conviction in what was at the time a very contrarian bet, still frankly contrarian in many circles, and that sort of sense of self and sense of certainty is itself a superpower. So as you look at the world today, very volatile in numerous ways, I think Bitcoin folks are actually pretty well equipped for that, right? The idea that the currency regime is under strain, leverage entering or leaving the system, geopolitical tensions, these are not novel concepts to folks who come from a Bitcoin background. And I think that therein lies the strength of the community.
Yeah, and I mentioned you too. I was talking to Doomberg, and I know you know him well. He's not someone that has Bitcoin. He understands Bitcoin in the sense of like, hey, it's has the properties. He doesn't believe anything's money. Like he doesn't believe we have a money right now, right? And I was talking to him about this idealism versus pragmatism. And like you just kind of mentioned, like as a miner, you kind of have to live in the future. As a Bitcoiner, you have to live in the future, and you have to kind of predict where the world is going in that sense. And you're living in the future, where someone like Doomberg is much more of a pragmatist, I would say, and a realist of like, hey, the world is this right now. Like we use dollars, I use dollars, you use dollars. No one's trading in gold and silver or Bitcoin in the general sense of the world we're talking about, and not these isolated incidences. So, where does that leave? Like, again, this transfer of wealth is happening. Like, where do you think people wake up maybe? Because I would say a lot of people are missing it in that sense. I understand where Doomberg's coming from, and I respect that. But I think a lot of it is, Bitcoin, if you see it as, hey, we're pulling society this way. This is the answer. And we're going to keep talking about it. And we're going to keep pulling people towards the truth. I mean, is that how you see it just in a broader scope?
Now, that's a very interesting question. I tend to think about things in this framework where there's gradients and there's diffusion, where things tend to start in one cluster, one specific area. And then over time, whether it's information or money supply or whatever technology, it diffuses along a path. And so as you think about Doomberg, as you mentioned with energy, they very famously talk about how with electrons, every electron that's pulled out of the ground will get used in the form of energy, right? Whether it's oil, gas, you name it. Even if it's not burned in the UK and they decide to cut for carbon reasons, they want to cut their emissions there, that same barrel of oil is going somewhere and will be burned. And so there's this constant diffusion of energy around the world. It will always find a point where it can get used. I think when you look at things like Bitcoin as another example, Bitcoin is something that has grown in adoption through diffusion. And so Bitcoin initially had that very early contingent of folks. You had people that were maybe true believers in decentralized currency or skeptical of the monetary system, et cetera. And that was the core group. And then over time, they evangelized. And like any new technology, there's a sales component. People tend to underestimate that. I think they view technology as something that stands by its own merit. But if you're not diffusing that technology, you're not getting it out there, it's not going to achieve worldwide adoption or large-scale adoption. And so as you look at Bitcoin as one technology, it solves different problems for different people. There are people that want a store of value that is outside of the local fiat system. That's great. There's people that are probably interested in the block space and what can be done with that as sort of an uncensorable place to have a ledger. There are different problems that this technology can solve, and so things move along these diffusion gradients over time and at different speeds.
Yeah, and that leads perfectly to something I was thinking and wanted to ask you, which was, what do you think is needed for that transition? Like, what do you think it's and the number go up, just needs to keep going up, and it goes to 500,000, it goes to 1 million, and it goes to 2 million, and people like finally start waking up? I mean, I have my own reservations in the sense of like, I think we're going to have maybe some social unrest, maybe geared towards Bitcoiners at that point, because governments of the world or whoever's not in is going to be pointing to, we've already seen it. I mean, like, hey, they're psychopaths, like whatever. But at the same time, the contrast to that is, do we need max pain? Do we need way more pain? I mean, we got 50-year mortgages and 15-year auto loans, like all these kicking of the can down the road, $1.5 trillion budget that Trump just announced, and we just crossed $1 trillion. So it seems like we're trying to kick the can. We need max pain. I don't know how close max pain really is. I think we're very far away. I'm like, where do you see this point where people wake up and realize like the confidence I have in this dollar and this fiat currency is gone?
Yeah. What you're describing to me is what is typically called a preference cascade, where people have these inner preferences, these different preferences that are not expressed. And then something happens. There's a catalyst. There's somewhat of this jolt to the system, and people start to reveal their preference versus what was stated before. They suddenly like, you know what, wholesale, I don't want want to be here, I want to be over there. I don't want to do this, I'm going to do that. And so to give an example with currency, what you're somewhat describing would be the equivalent of a preference cascade where people prefer not to have, say, the US dollar. Now, I think you'd probably start to see that in other currencies first. Currency crashes have happened, frankly, since times immemorial. It's always a question of confidence. And so rather than look at the dollar, maybe we could take something like the British pound. And so I've written, and you can see my work on X, I've written about the British pound and the sterling. And that is a currency that has actually had several attempts to kind of break the confidence over the decades, right? There was a very famous instance of George Soros breaking the Bank of England. So this is something where suddenly a preference cascade emerged where people did not want to hold sterling, or they were at least not as bullish on it as the market in the United Kingdom wanted them to be. And so when it comes to Bitcoin, you can see kind of leaps, or you could see a gradual, as I said, this sort of diffusion or this gradient. And so with the leaps, that would be some sort of revealed preference where people realize maybe it's not the dollar, maybe it's like the, in Nigeria, like the Naira or something, right? Like that, right? And they have access to another store of wealth, and they choose to flip. That's where stable coins have been very interesting to me. There's an idea that stable coins are somewhat of a trapdoor for Bitcoin. They get people into the digital ecosystem. They get their currency out of the sort of the centralized hands of a given bank. Once you're already in the stablecoin realm, it's a hop, skip, and a jump into Bitcoin. It really is. And so whether you want to make that jump today or tomorrow or wherever, it's a lot easier to onboard someone into Bitcoin if they're already in blockchain-based financials. And so that is something that I think provides the opportunity for those cascades to happen much faster than they used to be. Buying Bitcoin, as you probably know, was an ordeal. Still, frankly, for many people, is an ordeal. The less of an ordeal that it becomes, the faster these things can happen, because there just aren't these barriers that there have been historically.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's, we do get a lot of that over the years, right? The objection of, well, I guess from multiple angles, one of them just being, I guess, opponents of Bitcoin saying, hey, Bitcoin is a precursor to a CBDC. It's just people trying to get you used to that and things of that nature, which, again, it's not a great thing to have.
I would turn that around. I would turn that around. I think CBDCs could be frankly a precursor to Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that, right? And I think that the direction that the United States went in, where it's a private, they're private considerations, they're under some public guidelines and rules. But the form of the digital dollar that we're going to get is going to be something that may actually end up being somewhat of an ally to the Bitcoin community, at least insofar as it's easy to flip.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because there's different angles you could take with it. And that is one of them. It's funny because that's what I was kind of leading into. But the other part of it is we've had digital, this is where I have a problem with people saying that self-custody is tough, or like all these different things. And like, yeah, does it take a few minutes to learn and things of this nature? Yeah, of course, just like anything, driving a car or whatever it is. But people have been using digital stuff for decades. I mean, we've had, credit cards, all these different things. It's like, it's the same thing. So that, if anything, the digital dollar, which is what everyone uses nowadays, the stable coins, maybe an extension of that, people have been using that for decades. So people have been used to that. It's already a thing. So again, some of those things, I feel like they fall on deaf ears.
I fully agree with you. I would almost analogize it to a running watch. I don't know if you run, but if you've got say a Garmin or whatnot, right? You get outside and you look down and you click two buttons, and you're suddenly, you've got multiple satellites vectoring in on your position. I think at least 3 or 4, and you're good to go. And you hit 2 buttons, and now you've got this GPS tracking in place. I didn't have to do the differential calculus to go for my run. I just had to hit 2 buttons. That is a little bit like what I think will happen with Bitcoin. You don't necessarily need to be a core developer to get into this technology. It is getting easier every day. Most people don't understand how a carburetor works, but they drive a car, right? These are just the realities of technologies. I think early adopters will always have a little bit of an edge to something you said earlier. You want to be a little bit in the future. I think it's again, it comes back to diffusion. If you can see what tomorrow looks like because you're already living in it, I think you see this with coding, for example, and people that are very hyped now about agentic coding. Those are technologies that live in the command line interface, and in a matter of weeks to months, are going to be much more accessible to the average tech user. And so, as long as Bitcoin continues to become more adoptable, it will become more adopted.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, then check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.